The folks say it's some big news going around out here. Child, the folks say that some of y'all walking around without y'all Scentbird subscription. Them folks got just about every single designer fragrance that you've ever heard of. And you can try it for 30 days to see if you like it. If you do like it, you can get the whole bottle. If you don't like it, you can try different fragrances for the next 30 days. This tube right here may look small, but baby, that's a lot of liquid in there. I never use mine within the 30 days. This one right here is Viva La Juicy La Fleur, made by Juicy Couture. Got that caramel, vanilla, red berry smell all kind of mixed together. But baby, that ain't nothing, child. I knew that Ariana Grande could sing, but baby, I ain't know she could have you smelling like this. This fragrance right here is called Cloud, and it's by Ariana Grande. This one has a very coconut-like smell. Then it has a sprinkle of pear. And pretty much Cloud is the right name because it smells like heaven, for real. If you want to try Scentbird, scan the QR code or click the link in my description. Use my code, which is Ashley55 off, and get 55% off of your first month at Scentbird. $8 for your first month, and then after that, it's less than $17 a month. All right, guys, this is Ashley with Ashley Says So, and I am back with another Old Hollywood Scandal video. Because I had an ad, I'm gonna have to skip the shout outs on this video because it's time to get to the nitty gritty. And baby, the nitty is very gritty because I had no idea that the king of country, George Jones, was also the king of scandalous things, child. Let's go and get to it after this disclaimer. Y'all know my disclaimer. I do not know what's true or false. I just find gossip and tea from online, books, magazines, word of mouth, anywhere I can find it, ball it up and tell you a story, and put it in a video for you guys. George Glenn Jones was born on September the 12th, 1931 in Saratoga, Texas. His mother's name was Clara Patterson Jones, and his father's name was George Washington Jones. And along with George, the Joneses had several other children. Now, unfortunately, George's childhood was not really a happy one. His father had a drinking problem, and then whenever he became drunk, he became abusive to the family. Even when little George found an escape by listening and singing with music on the radio, his father turned that into an abusive experience. Said he would come home late at night drunk and then yank George up out the bed and tell him to dance and sing or he was gonna beat his behind. But the crazy thing about it is that maybe George's father was doing this drunken abusive singing thing because he actually liked George's singing, because gossip claims that when George turned 16, his father was the one to buy him his first guitar. Baby, George took that doggone guitar and he left home real quick. And first he went to the military. Then in the year 1951, he ended up marrying a lady by the name of Dorothy. But George was way too much for Dorothy to deal with, so not even a year later, she divorced him. Now, after he divorced Dorothy, George ended up marrying a lady by the name of Shirley Ann Corley. And it was while he was with her that he ended up working on his music career and becoming a country singer. But he was also too much for Shirley to deal with. So in the year 1968, she divorced him too. Now, I'm sure George was a character during his first and second marriages, but it was his third marriage where his craziness started to be kind of known, because he ended up marrying a star just as big as he was, and her name was Tammy Wynette. And to be honest with you, I could have told Tammy that her and George's marriage was gonna be on some BS, because the way it started was on some BS. See, Tammy's long-headed tail was already married. As a matter of fact, she was married to her second husband, a guy by the name of Don Chappell, or maybe even Don Chappelle. However you pronounce his name, gossip claims that Tammy and Don used to fight a lot. Their relationship was always up and down. Well, Tammy Wynette was a country singer, and a lot of times she would be on the same tour as George Jones, and she and George Jones became very close on these tours. But George Jones was also very close to her husband, Don Chappell. So anyway, the story says that Tammy and Don are in their place of residence and they end up getting into a huge argument. And somebody has the bright idea to call George Jones over. You know, since he's both of their friends, he was supposed to be a mediator. Well, baby, George ain't mediate a doggone thing. What he did was walked into them folks' house and told Don, hey, Don, brother, let me tell you something. I don't even know why you're doing all this talking, because the whole reason Tammy is arguing with you anyway is because she's in love with me. Yep, matter of fact, I hate to say it, but when I leave here tonight, she's actually coming with me. Now, ain't that right, Tammy? The folks say that she ended up telling George, yes, that's right, George, and she packed up her children and she hit the road with George Jones and never went back to Don Chappell again. So you see what I'm saying? It was already some mess when they they got together. And when they did get together, baby, you couldn't tell them nothing. Honey, I am telling you, George Jones and Tammy Wynette thought they were the Beyonce and Jay-Z of country music. Or whatever couple you look at up here, that's what they thought. Honey was singing all kind of duets together, kissing and rubbing and hugging all on stage, and the audience just went wild. I mean, they would eat it up. Matter of fact, said they started calling themselves Mr. and Mrs. Country Music. But soon word started leaking out that Tammy and George were less like Beyonce and Jay-Z and more like Bobby and Whitney. Child, the folks say that George Jones would get drunk and bust Tammy Wynette all upside her head. Said that one time he chased her all around the house with a rifle, threatening to shoot her. In fact, after George and Tammy divorced in the year 1975, Tammy Wynette ended up writing a book and detailed her marriage to George. She told the world how he was a terrible drunk, how he chased her around with the rifle. But because Tammy Wynette had her own problems with drugs and alcohol, and because she kind of had a messy and scandalous lifestyle herself, a lot of people thought she was lying in that book. They thought she was trying to do things to get attention. They didn't believe none of that stuff about their king of country, George Jones. But let me tell you something, honey, they should have believed every word. Because the stuff that he did to the next woman in his life, let me go and get to it so y'all can hear it for yourself. Now, this lady's name was Nancy Sepulveda. And in 1981, Nancy Sepulveda was a 30-year-old single mother to a daughter named Adina, and she worked at AT&T on an assembly line. While she was working one day, a co-worker came up to her asking her if she wanted to meet George Jones because, see, the co-worker was dating a roadie who worked for George Jones. And the co-worker wanted to leave on a little small vacation and go visit the roadie, so she wanted to take Nancy with her, and she was telling Nancy, you know, maybe you can meet George Jones. Like, girl, what if that country music star takes an interest in you? Well, gossip claims when Nancy and her co-worker go to the George Jones show, George Jones takes an immediate interest in Nancy. See, by this time, George Jones is around 50 years old and Nancy is 30. So he's telling her, you know, she's a beautiful, young, pretty thing, telling her all the things he can do for her as an older man and also as a country music star. And so Nancy does develop a crush on George. And so for the 3 or 4 days that she and her coworker are down there, you know, she is with George pretty much every second. Well, when it was time for Nancy and her coworker to leave, George Jones told Nancy she was going to be his new little lady and he wanted her to stay on tour with him. And so she told George, you know, thank you so much, I would love to stay, but I got to go back with my baby. Well, Nancy wasn't ready for just how smooth George Jones was. How about when she went and got her daughter and pulled up at her house? George Jones was standing in her driveway with his hair swooped to the side with a pair of shades on and told her, I told you I wanted you and now I'ma have you. And honey, like I always say, you know, Nancy was steamed up in the undercarriage over this. Ain't no man had ever pursued her like this before. And then when George explained that he had tracked down where she lived and had got a private jet to fly him back to her house before she made it there? Oh, that's all Nancy needed to hear. Honey, she was flattered. And really, pretty much from that moment, she and George kind of started living together because he stayed with her and her daughter for like a whole month. Oh, George was performing well in the bedroom. Then he'd get up in the morning and he would go play with her daughter. He would sometimes treat them to nice meals and buy little trinkets here and there. So Nancy was falling head over heels. But what Nancy didn't know is that whole month that George was staying with them, he was actually missing his shows. He was supposed to be on the road on the tour. Baby, he was missing all them shows and missing all that money. And this is something that will become a huge problem later on in their relationship. But right now, Nancy was oblivious. She was just enjoying what was happening. That is until one day when she came home and she caught George Jones looking like Queen Elizabeth I by the face. And so Nancy is like, George, what happened to your face? Why you got all that white stuff on your face? So Nancy walks closer and that's when she sees a mound of cocaine on the table. And Nancy, who told this story, said that even though she was 30 years old and she had done some partying and things like that, she didn't know anything about cocaine or its effects. And so out of pure curiosity, she asked George, oh, wow, is that cocaine? George, why do you sniff that stuff? What does it do? Honey say George said this what it do, and laid her behind right out. Baby Nancy say she was seeing stars. This man had slapped her out of nowhere. And she's really just stunned. In fact, she was too stunned to cry. And this was a great thing because George told her, I sure hope you don't go crying and acting all emotional. One thing I can't stand, I cannot stand for a woman to go sitting around crying everywhere she go. Baby said Nancy pulled herself up off of the floor and prayed that she would never see this side of George again. And her prayers were absolutely not answered. In fact, this incident right here made George Jones comfortable enough to let his bad side show. The man was drinking and drugging daily. Matter of fact, a demon ended up entering him. And I know you guys are all like, oh, come on, Ashley. Now, where is this story going? I'm just telling you what Nancy said. Nancy said when George Jones acted out, it was not him because he was an angel, a godly man. All of his bad behavior was because a cocaine demon had entered him and made him behave that way. Story says it all started one night when George got high as a kite. He's sitting there snorting and drinking, and suddenly he stands up and started saying names over and over in a gravelly voice. Ian, Harold, Edward, and Wallace. Just like that. And he just continues saying these names over and over and over until he is screaming at the top of his lungs. And once he started screaming, he started punching and fighting the air, thinking he was knocking out these men who possessed the names he was calling out. And per Nancy, the names that he was calling out were names of his drug dealers. So he thought he was knocking out his drug dealers. And so Nancy is just sitting in the room petrified. And so she ends up taking off running, and she messes around and she runs into the line of sight of George Jones. And Nancy said that man took after her flying like a bat out of hell. She said she felt that man grab her from around her doggone waist, and he dragged her and took her to the bathroom and threw her in the tub and just started welling. And so Nancy is dodging and she's screaming for her life, and she's like, George, it's me, Nancy. I'm not those men, it's me. And George is saying, yes, you are. You guys are trying to kill me. Keep giving me these drugs. I know who you are. Said this man kept punching until they both passed out. When Nancy woke up, her face was an unrecognizable mess. She called a friend over, and the friend ended up talking her into going to the hospital, which Nancy did. And so they kept her there for a few hours, and then they sent her back on her way. When she got back to the motel where this story was actually taking place, she said that George was still passed out. When this man woke up a couple of hours later, honey, he was flabbergasted and upset. My God, Nancy, my beautiful queen, look at your face. Who did this to you, Nancy? I'm gonna kill him dead. I'm gonna kill him. And Nancy is just sitting there like, George, you did it. You did this to me. No. Now you stop right there. I couldn't have did this. I would never do nothing like this to you. It just ain't in me, Nancy. I can never be so cruel. And Nancy believed this. She said she understood that at this moment, the man that was talking to her was the real George. And that's when she knew that George Jones's cocaine demon was real. Nancy said one time the cocaine demon got into George, and as he was beating her, he was switching up from George to the demon. George to the demon. Child say George was switching up mid-swing like, I hate you. You're a drug dealer. You're trying to kill me. I hate you. Nancy, what's going on with your face? Oh God, Nancy, I know who you are. You terrible drug dealers. Nancy, who keeps hitting you and running away? Baby, I ain't lying. Go read that woman doggone book. Honey said that he would even tear her up sometimes because he couldn't drop his load like he wanted to. Child, so the stories say George will be doing all this drinking and drugging, and it would increase his sex drive. You know, he would want to get it in. But at the same time, doing all of this drugs and drinking, and then at the age you are, it would lower his ability to perform. And not only was his performance down here, his drug use would hinder his ability to orgasm. Said George would get to the last stroke, and if he couldn't get that feeling that he was looking for, child, he was sitting up there throwing slaps around, and Nancy was catching him. A scandalous thing, child. But Nancy did say that she remembers the last day that George ever put his hands on her. She said they were in a hotel again waiting for George to go perform at a show. And George, drinking and drugging like always, suddenly was like, I don't want to perform tonight. I'm not going. And see, usually Nancy would cry, beg, and plead, you know, George, the fans love you. We need the money. Please go on stage. But see, this night, she wasn't doing none of that. She was fed up. So she told George Jones, look, I don't care what you do. Well, just you wait one cotton picking minute. What do you mean you don't care if I perform? How you gonna eat tonight, Nancy? You and your daughter. Where's our money gonna come from if I don't go perform? And Nancy was like, I said what I said. I don't care if you perform. Child, before she could finish, George had snatched her up by the arms, ready to go in on her. But this time, Nancy pushed him back. And since George was impaired, he ended up falling back and hitting his back on a heater or radiator or something, and it ended up cutting his back open. And soon as it does, he starts howling, "Ooh, Nancy, what'd you do that for, Nancy? Why'd you push me?" But before Nancy can answer, an officer shows up at the door, knocking, telling them to open up, and Nancy does. And so the officer is like, people are saying it's loud in here, what's going on? And Nancy tells him straight out, George was trying to hit me, and so I pushed him down and he hurt his back. And so the officer says, okay, Mr. Jones, is that what really happened? What really happened? Thankfully, George told the officer, yeah, Nancy's telling the truth. I was trying to slap her around and she pushed me down and hurt my back. Honey, the officer gonna say, well, okay. Well, see, whatever y'all doing, y'all got to keep it down. You got that, Mr. Jones? Ain't asked Nancy if she wanted any help. Ain't tried to remove her from the situation. I mean, he pretty much gave George the go-ahead to slap that woman around as long as they kept it quiet. But luckily, George didn't slap her around. As a matter of fact, like I said before, per Nancy, that was the very last night that George ever put brutal hands on her like that. But don't let this make you think it was all better, because just because George Jones wasn't throwing hands, don't mean he wasn't treating Nancy like straight garbage. Gossip claims one time they were touring in Texas and were driving in Texas on a very dark highway in the middle of the night. Said out of nowhere, George woke up from a drug-induced slumber and started looking for Nancy. Nancy, where are you? Oh, there you are. You know what? If you don't want to be with me, you don't have to be with me. You get off of this bus right now. Get out of here. Get out of here. Started walking up on her and pushing her back towards the front door. Then told the bus driver to stop the bus on the side of the road and open up the door and dragged Nancy out and walked back up them doggone bus steps, shut the doors, and told the bus driver to drive the H off. And as I was reading this stuff, y'all, I really felt like this man was gonna come back. I mean, I really did. Baby, that man ain't came back nowhere. The story says that Nancy was walking down the side of the road in the dark crying the whole time. She didn't make it to a gas station until that very next morning, and that's when she called a friend to come get her. And I know that story got some of y'all steaming mad. Well, baby, get ready to be mad some more, because gossip claims that George Jones did this to Nancy several times. And sometimes when he kicked her off the bus, her daughter Adina would be kicked off with her. And her baby girl would both be walking down the doggone road at night. And not only would he kick Nancy off the tour bus, sometimes he would just leave her behind, y'all. Like, they would be on the tour bus and they would go stop at a rest stop to use the bathroom or something like that. Baby, George would rush back to the tour bus and be like, okay, everybody, let's go. And leave Nancy at the rest stop bathroom. She would have to hitch a ride to the venue, or sometimes she would have to go straight to the airport to just fly back home and wait for him to get there. One time, George Jones and Nancy were on a private jet flying somewhere very far, and when the jet stopped to refuel, George left Nancy at the refueling station, and that may have been the time when Nancy didn't even have any money on her. She basically had to convince people that she knew George Jones, and if they could fly her back home or drive her back home, she would be able to pay them when she had access to the money. And that was actually the issue. Even though George was doing all of this, Nancy would always go back home. She would never leave. But per Nancy, she said she felt like she was on a mission from God to save George's soul from the cocaine demon. And so she kept fighting. And baby, she was fighting hard because this woman was not only dodging demons, she was dodging bullets too. The folks say when she would mess up dinner or cook something wrong, honey, George Jones would pull out a shotgun and shoot up the whole house. Nancy would be sitting up there ducking and dodging and breathing hard and looking like Michael Jackson by the head. But, you know, like I said plenty of times before, Nancy tried to chalk this bad behavior up to drugs. But clearly there was something else going on. Because at one point, George Jones actually went to rehab for 30 days and got clean. But gossip claims a couple of days after he got out, him, Nancy, and her daughter were in a car going down the street, and Nancy was actually driving, and George was sitting in the passenger side, and he pulled out a huge bag of cocaine. So Nancy and her daughter, who is a bit older now, are like, you know, please, George, you know, you just got clean. Please, George, just fight it. Just chuck it out of the window. Get rid of it. And at first, George don't budge. But after they keep saying it, you know, I guess he starts to believe it, and he's like, you know what? Y'all are right. I'm not going to do it. And so he ends up throwing it out of the window. And immediately after those drugs left his hand, George turned to Nancy just like this. You stupid bee, you made me chunk my drugs out of the window. Now you're gonna drive. You're gonna drive this car, Nancy. Drive fast. And Nancy is like, George, calm down. I'm not calming down anywhere. Drive fast, like I said. And then he takes his foot and then stamps down on her foot, which is on the gas pedal. He stamps down hard and makes them kind of zoom off. Because see, in those old cars, there wasn't like a lot of middle stuff in the middle. It was like open space where you can kind of slide from the driver to the passenger seat. And so that's how he did it. Well, anyway, Nancy and Adina are screaming for their lives. Nancy toe hurting, and she's trying to keep control of this car that's speeding down this road. And soon they end up passing a police officer who immediately gets behind them to pull them over. When he does, Nancy tells the police officer exactly what happens, but when the police officer tries to talk to George, he over there like this, trying to act like he's asleep, talking about he don't really remember if that really happened or not. So the officer is like, well, y'all were driving terribly. All of y'all are going to jail. But when the sheriff came to the jail, he ended up being a very big fan of George Jones, and so he let the whole family go. And then there was another time when George and Nancy were in the car alone, and George was very high and he was speeding, and he ended up flipping the car like 5 times, and the car landed on its roof. Luckily, George and Nancy were okay, but here go George. Hey, Nancy, I know we're in the back seat now instead of the front seats, but this is a good thing. See, now you can tell the police officer that you were driving. And Nancy is like, no, George, I'm not doing that. You were driving. I ain't telling them nothing. Well, yep, you see, that's what I don't like from you. And yes, you will tell him that, you dummy, because I am drunk. And if you don't tell him that, you see, I can go to jail. And so Nancy does what she's told. She ends up taking the charge, which was a reckless driving charge, and George gets off scot-free. Oh, but check me out, y'all. Sometimes when George Jones and Nancy got in the car, something strange would happen, y'all. Y'all listen to this closely. Sometimes these folks would get into their car, and there would be an old man as well as Donald Duck in the back seat. And if this sounds insane, it absolutely was, because the old man and Donald Duck would both be George Jones. See, what would happen is George Jones would get into the car and suddenly start talking in 3 voices. It will be his normal voice as George Jones, then there will be an old man voice, then there will be a Donald Duck voice. But George always made it clear, and by the way he would talk and behave, that those voices, the old man and Donald Duck voices, were coming from the back seat. Gossip claims that these 3 voices would be having conversations with each other. And most of the time, they would end up getting into an argument with each other, all 3. And sometimes these arguments would get vicious, baby. I'm talking about Donald Duck would be cussing everybody out. So anyway, one day, Nancy is driving, and allegedly George Jones is actually sitting in the back seat, having the conversation with the old man and Donald Duck. And they end up getting the arguing like they always do, but this time it got real, baby. Donald Duck ended up swinging on folk. And so George and the old man ain't finna get beat up, so they start swinging too. So I guess this translates into George Jones in the backseat beating himself up. But he is just really swinging, being all three of these people. He's really getting towed down. Well, Nancy is driving and she pulls over and then she's like, enough, y'all need to stop. And so she gets out of the driver's seat and she goes to the back door. She opens the door and she goes, Donald, come on, I'm dragging you out of here. And she acts like she's dragging Donald Duck out and she throws him out of the car. Then she does the same to the old man. And so she's like, George, they're gone. You don't have to worry about them no more. They are out of this car. You know, it's all done. And she gets back in the driver's seat. And baby, before she can pull off, George is like, whoa, Nancy, they're coming back. Oh boy, they're angry now, Nancy. Nancy, they're opening the door. They're in here, Nancy, they're in here. So Nancy is like, George, hold on. I'm coming back there. Gets out of the car again, goes back, opens the door, and kind of fights with these imaginary creatures. Y'all, I hate to say it, but this is what she said in the book. But anyways, goes and fights with these imaginary creatures, pulls them out again, and then this time, like, she has to shut the door and rush and get in the driver's seat and take off immediately before they can get back in the car. And only when she did that, did George kind of calm down and catch his breath and, oh, thank goodness, they're out of here, Nancy. Thank you for doing that. And you know what's crazy and really bone chilling? After this incident, Nancy says she never heard about Donald Duck or the old man ever again. And so this is what I meant when I was saying I think it was a little bit more than a cocaine demon, or, maybe you can call them that. I don't know. I feel like it may have been some sort of, mental illness going on. Maybe it's alleged. That's my opinion. I don't know. But now let me hit you with the doozy, because how about after everything I've told y'all thus far, baby, how about gossip claims that Nancy and George wasn't even married yet? This stuff happened before they got married. As a matter of fact, they got married in the year 1983. She met him in the year 1981. So all of this stuff we've talked about thus far happened in that first 2 years, allegedly. And when it came down to the marriage, George did not propose to Nancy in the usual way. He just kind of came in the house one day and was like, get up, we're gonna go take blood tests so we can go get married. And that's what they did. They went straight to the courthouse, took the blood test, got married. Actually, after the wedding, they went to Burger King to eat. Most people have questioned Nancy over and over. How could she marry George Jones after all of that she had already been through? But like I said, Nancy said she loved him and she was on a mission from God. Also, I think she also got a little relief because she was able to have more of a say in their finances as well. Like, George Jones didn't really have a concept of money. He felt like $100,000 was the same as $1 million. So per Nancy, he would be selling stuff worth millions of dollars for $100,000. And if Nancy was like, George, we could have got $5 million off of that. Psh, Nancy, what is $5 million to $100,000? So, money issues and stuff like that, she was able to finally really help George Jones as his wife. Another thing that Nancy was instrumental in was getting George Jones back together with Tammy Wynette, not to be together, but in order for them to record those duos so they can make some real good money, which they did. But that almost didn't happen because George Jones was doing too much. Gossip claims when Nancy set up the reunion dinner for him and Tammy Wynette to reconnect, George came into the dinner talking about some, ooh wee, Tammy, you sure mighty skinny. Girl, you got the AIDS or something. Said it in front of everybody, child. Tammy Wynette hair was sitting up there, blew back. It was just a mess, but luckily they were able to work through that and make beautiful music and a lot of money. Another thing I think Nancy was able to do is kind of limit how many people George was around when he was going through an episode of his drinking and drugging. But there was one time when I guess she didn't limit it good enough. Sometime during the late 80s or the early 90s, George Jones had a show on a big personal ranch that he and Nancy owned. And after the show, they invited this elderly couple who were like super fans of George Jones. They invited them back to their house so, they could talk and chat and visit each other. Well, while the couple was there at the house, somebody had the bright idea to play a game involving marbles. George tried to cheat a little bit, but the elderly couple called him out on it, so he had to stop, and so they ended up winning the game. Baby, them folks say George got up and flipped that table over. Child said them marbles was busting them old folks all upside they doggone head. And after he was done doing his little tantrum, he ended up stumping off to the back room, never apologized to them folks or nothing, child. And it was actually in the 1990s where Nancy said she was about ready to finally throw up her hands. You know what I'm saying? She was ready to throw in the towel. She felt like she would never defeat this cocaine demon. But she said there was finally one incident that happened that started to set George Jones on the right path. Story says this happened in the year 1996 or 1997, and George was driving down the highway in his brand new Lexus. While he was driving, he was on the cell phone with Nancy's daughter Adina, cursing her out because he didn't understand how the CD player worked. And so he gets so frustrated that he starts hitting the dashboard and the radio and the steering wheel with all of his might. And I don't know if an airbag deployed or what. All I know is that before he knew it, he ended up hitting a concrete barrier on a bridge and going over that mother sucker and landed right in that doggone water and started sinking like a rock while he was stuck up under the steering wheel. Thankfully, somebody was able to come down and rescue his behind before he ended up passing away. And it was while George was in the hospital healing from this incident that allegedly he started to show signs of change. He started to want better for himself. He started to treat people better, especially Nancy. And slowly but surely, per Nancy, George Jones became a man of God. By the mid-2000s, Nancy had felt like she had finally won the battle with the cocaine demon. By this time, of course, George was in his 70s, but still, hey, it's still a good thing. All I know is that I'm just glad he started treating his wife better somewhere along the line. And I'm also glad he was able to finally show up and do what he needed to do for his fans who loved him to absolute death. So George Jones did his shows, got all kind of accolades, love, and praise all the way up to the age of 81 years old, where he ended up passing away on April the 26th, 2013. And as for his cause of death, George Jones had been hospitalized plenty of times in his lifetime. All I know is that 6 days before he actually died, they said that he was running a high fever and he had trouble breathing, respiratory issues, and low blood pressure. So anyway, this is the very scandalous tale of Mr. George Jones. One thing I cannot take away from this man, though, is that he did become a legend during his own lifetime. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. If you guys are new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button. If you guys have been sitting on the fence, come on and subscribe. And y'all, I will see you guys soon with another video.